Hey there, everybody. It's Mr. Denton again here. I'm going to take a look at Article 2, which deals with the executive branch today. So, hope this finds you well. Hope you're taking good care of yourself. We're just going to go through the first half of this again and try to make it quick. There's a lot of information to cover, so I will move fast. All right, here we go. So, bird's eye view overview here of the executive branch. Article 2 does cover what we call the executive branch, which is the president, plus a lot of other people that work underneath the president. The President of the United States is an American invention. It's unique. It's something that we borrowed a lot of things from other civilizations, but the presidency is something that we created primarily to solve a problem, which we'll look at here on the next slide. Primary purpose of the executive branch is to execute or carry out the laws. So whereas the legislative branch, Congress, creates the laws, makes the laws, it's the executive branch's job to carry out those laws. So it is a massive branch. Okay, obviously the president is the focal point of the executive branch, but America is so big and so powerful, especially in 2020, and we have influence and responsibilities all over the world, and we're a massive country with close to 400 million people who expect a lot out of their government. 4 million people work for the executive branch alone to make sure that all that stuff happens, all that stuff works. So that's an important thing to remember and something we'll look at a little bit later on. So, just a closer look at the executive branch. Why do we have a president? Well, the presidency, like a lot of other things in our Constitution, was in some ways a reaction to either the Articles of Confederation or the government that we threw off as a result of the Revolution. Okay, and actually, the president is a reaction to both those things. The Articles of Confederation, you'll remember, was a failure because there was no central authority and there was no figure within that government that could, when we had a time of crisis, like a war or something like that. There was no one there to make a decision right here, right now that could be decisive. That's what you got to have in those times of crisis, and nobody was there. There was no figure like that that was created by the Articles of Confederation. On the other hand, nobody wanted, almost no one, I should say, wanted a king. We had just gotten rid of a king as a result of the revolution. Nobody wanted to see that again. Nobody wanted to see anyone have enough power to where they could become a tyrant, okay, and become literally the government itself, and be corrupted by that power. So the presidency lies somewhere in between, someone with tremendous authority and power, but is still held in check by the other branches of our government. So the executive branch does have some legislative power, mostly, the form of checks against Congress, like the veto. They've also got a lot of influence over legislation, but they are not legislators. They don't make laws. Congress does that. Okay, they are fully separated from Congress. They are a co-equal branch of government, and then you see there the qualifications to be president: 35 years old. 14 years has to be a resident of the United States prior to becoming president. But in bold there, you see that the president, this is something unique to the presidency, has to be a natural born citizen. Okay, every other part of our government, you could be, you could be an immigrant born elsewhere, and not born a United States citizen, and then become a citizen and then hold that office. Okay, but to be president of the United States, you have to be born a citizen of the United States. You either have to be born in America or you have to be born to Americans. So, kind of little example of this. One of the more popular governors in recent memory, Arnold Schwarzenegger, is a former bodybuilder, a very very famous actor. Was the governor of California for several years, and was a very popular governor. And the guy could have probably had a shot at becoming president, except for he's Austrian. He was not born an American, and so he could never be president. So that is, like I said, that's unique to the presidency. There are informal qualifications to the presidency as well. And in the past, lots of politicians have been held to some of these informal qualifications. In other words, they're not written into the Constitution, but the presidency is probably especially so. Many individuals who have tried to run for president have been discounted, have never gotten into the presidency or gotten close to the presidency because of things in their background, because of stuff with their family or because of personal actions. Or they just, as the process went along in choosing a president, they weren't seen as fit when it came to their personality or decisions that they'd made in the past or whatever the case may be. And we could spend a lot of time looking at Donald Trump as a case study when it comes to this stuff, because Trump literally has broken the mold when it came to all those things, and it's happened recently enough for most of you guys that you've seen. And remember the election of 2016 and all the things that happened leading up to it. President Trump's got a different past than everyone who's ever been president. For one thing, he's never served in government. He's never been in the military, never been a general, none of those things. And every person who has ever been president has served in government or been served in the military somewhere along the way. And he was a reality show host. Before that, he was a guy who was primarily made his name and his wealth in real estate. That's not a background. We've never had a president with that kind of background. And there's some other things, obviously, that came up during the election process about the president's just family background and things of that nature. Again, we don't have time to get into any of that stuff, but he's a unique figure for sure. And we'll see whether or not President Trump is an anomaly. In other words, do we go back to having more traditional politicians after President Trump, or is this the new normal? Are we going to have a lot of celebrity presidents in our future? We'll find out. All right, some random information about the presidency. Not going to spend very much time on this, so we can hopefully come close to staying on track. We've had 45 presidencies. 44 different men have held the office. Grover Cleveland held two non-consecutive or served two non-consecutive terms. So those are both treated as individual presidencies. We've had two fathers and sons, John Adams and his son John Quincy, and then George Herbert Walker Bush, and then George W. Bush. And it does need to be mentioned, it says up there 44 men. We've never had a woman president. But that is, like I said, that's going to happen. It'll happen in my lifetime, let alone your lifetime. We're not that far off, and it's going to happen sooner rather than later, likely. We've had one grandfather and grandson, the Harrisons, both pretty forgettable presidencies, but that's a memorable statistic there. Franklin Delano Roosevelt served longer than any other president. He was elected 4 times. Now remember, that was during the Great Depression and World War II. And then he served for 12 years and passed away due to natural causes very early on in his 4th term. Teddy Roosevelt was the youngest to serve at 42. JFK was the youngest elected at 43. How did that happen? Well, Teddy Roosevelt was not actually elected at 42. He was the vice president, and then William McKinley was assassinated, and he became president. Ronald Reagan was the oldest president, 73 when elected to his 2nd term. But whoever wins this election, and as I speak, we are now down to Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Whoever wins out of those two guys will be the oldest president to ever serve. So that'll be gone. We've had 4 presidents who were assassinated, in other words, murdered while in office. 8 presidents have died either from assassination or natural causes while in office. That statistic, that next one there, is inaccurate now. Need to update all these things. Haven't had time to do that, but we've had 3 presidents who have been impeached now, including Donald Trump. in 2019. We had Clinton back in the late 90s. And then we had Andrew Johnson right after the Civil War. None of those guys were removed, and we've already kind of been over this stuff a little bit. The only president who has left office without, dying is Richard Nixon, and he resigned. He would have been impeached, he would have been removed, but he quit before that ever happened. 44 of our presidents have been white Christian males. The only exception to that was President Obama, who was a black Christian male. Okay, so again, I foresee that statistic is going to change in the not too distant future, but we'll have to see what happens. Okay. So a lot of information on those last two, or on that last section here. So we're going to try to move quick through the rest of this stuff. Some official roles of the President of the United States. You have the Chief Executive and Administrator. They are the boss of the executive branch, and they have tremendous power because of that. It is a massive branch that includes our military and all these different agencies, from the CIA to the IRS. And all the president is the boss of that entire branch, and has tremendous power within that branch to hire and fire people, and to make sure those people are doing and carrying out his vision. The president is the commander in chief. And so the president is the leader of all of our armed forces, which we have 5 branches of. And so in the United States, this is a very, very important characteristic of our democracy. The head of our military, the very top of our military, has to be a citizen. And so, in other words, we can't have generals, people in the military making decisions, making final decisions without the authority of the president behind them. And that's, like I said, that's a really important thing because, if you go into the past, even the not too distant past, you look at World War II when, Japan and just some other places in history like that, typically speaking, politics and the military, they corrupt each other a lot. And so in times of war, we want to have that individual who is a citizen, who's seeing the big picture, who's seeing everything. Because in war and in defense, our military people, they are tasked with having a very narrow view of things. They are there to win. They are there to look for ways and find ways to make sure that we are victorious. The president, though, has to see things beyond that. And so we want those guys to stay in those lanes. We want our military doing everything they can to put all their energy into winning, but we want the president to see the big picture. And so we have to have those things. And maybe the biggest example of this in history is the Cuban Missile Crisis. 13 Days, great movie, really illustrates this stuff. If you ever have a chance, right now we're doing this during quarantine. Go watch that movie. Great movie, and it illustrates that point big time. So the president has to be the foreign policy leader. They guide and direct our relationship with the rest of the world. They're not just the face of America to us, but to everyone else in the world as well. And so then the president is also the chief agenda setter. So they're not lawmakers, they're not legislators, but they have tremendous influence over policy and legislation. Okay. There's also some unofficial roles of the president. The president is the head of state. Okay, they are the head of the government and a symbol of leadership, both again to America and to the rest of the world. Okay, so they don't just have the power that goes along with being president when we're talking about dealing with the rest of the world, but they're also, like I said, kind of the face of America too, and that's a really important thing as well. They really influence how the rest of the world sees America, the way they see us. They're the top-ranking official of their party, and they do everything they can to try and get as many members of their party elected, because that's going to help them carry out their agenda. They are seen as the keeper of the economy. And so they're usually held responsible for the economy, whether it's going really well or not very well. And this is usually presidents are given too much credit and too much blame when it comes to the economy. The economy can be impacted by the president, but it's also very, very heavily influenced, probably much more so by the laws that are passed by Congress and a lot of other factors as well. But in the end, you have that one person, you have that one face that everybody sees on TV every day, and that they go and everyone goes and votes for the president. He's usually, if the economy's going great, then the president's really popular. If it's not going very well, then the president's not going to be very popular, typically speaking. Um, and then finally, the president is the chief citizen. I'm going to make sure I get this video posted below for you. It's super short. I encourage you to watch it. George Washington had a rough presidency in a lot of ways. He left office historically unpopular. And there were some tough times. 9/11, two wars started. You had the financial crisis that started at the end. But this is one of the cooler moments in history, I think. Right after 9/11, George Bush, he walks out to a baseball game, I believe it was World Series, and it's right after 9/11, and people are scared, they're terrified. Just don't know what's going on. Just a really scary time in America. And he walks out to the mound to throw out the first pitch, and just throws a strike. And he practiced a ton before throwing this pitch, and I love that story because it just really brings to mind how important it is, how many important things there are that a president does, and what impact they can have on the outlook of Americans that don't those things. I mean, these things have nothing to do with anything in the Constitution. Throwing out a first pitch at a baseball game doesn't have anything that's not mentioned in the Constitution, but it was one of the most important things that he ever did, and the reaction of the crowd is pretty cool after he throws that pitch. So again, I encourage you to watch that. Okay, compensation for the president. You see some statistics there and some of the things that the president has access to. Again, not going to spend a whole bunch of time on this. It's pretty self-explanatory. We'll tell you, a lot of times people say, man, the president only makes $400,000 a year, and like Jeff Bezos makes $400,000 in 30 seconds. But it's about way more than the money. And yeah, it's about the power and influence, but it's also, the president, he's making $400,000 a year, and he's not having to pay a dime for anything. His housing, his insurance, travel. That $400,000 is going straight in the bank. And then after a person's done being president, they should never have to worry about money ever again, because they're going to be able to speak and and do all kinds of different things, and write books and stuff like that. Presidents are usually wealthy when they go into office, but they're definitely going to leave office and be set for life. So see some other things there that are kind of neat. The White House literally follows the president wherever he or she goes. That's on Air Force One. That's when they travel, wherever they set up, becomes a mobile White House. And you see the vehicles that the president has access to. The car that you see in front of Air Force One in that picture there, that's known as the Beast. It's basically a tank that looks like a limousine, Kevlar tires and bulletproof windows and things like that. So the vice president also mentioned down there at the bottom, $208,000 a year, and they live at a mansion known as Number One Observatory Circle. Okay. All right. Finish things up here. Powers of the presidency. President has war powers, but it's important to note that Congress is the one listed in the Constitution as having the authority to actually declare war. But the president has developed more war powers in the past 30 or 40 years, especially with with 9/11, and the president now has tremendous power to send in troops. We have carried out 2 wars for as long as you guys have been alive in the Middle East without ever declaring war. Because of rules and things that have been passed to give the president more power when it comes to that stuff. But ultimately, to officially declare and go to war, that role and responsibility belongs to Congress. But the president obviously has a super important role in that as the um, commander in chief. President has veto power. Another little video down there in the bottom right hand corner that we don't have, we can't show here, but I'll post that for you later. President can strike down laws that are passed by Congress if he or she does not approve of those laws, and then Congress has the opportunity to override that veto, but that does not happen very often. So that is the primary legislative power that the president has. President has a ton of power because they get to nominate uh, both members of the executive branch, heads of the department, agencies, and stuff like that. But they also get to nominate judges. So that's kind of their check over the judicial branch. They are the one that they nominate every, not just Supreme Court justices, but every federal seat when it comes to the judicial branch. Now, Congress has a check on that power because they have to approve judges and they have to approve all these department heads and things like that. But the president has the power to make those nominations. Pardons and reprieves, you probably got a pretty good idea what that's all about. The president can either pardon someone, in other words, make it so that it was like they were never found guilty. Reprieve doesn't get rid of that stigma, but it ends their any time that they might be serving or punishment that they might be facing. The president can issue executive orders. This is about as close as you can get to the president making laws. And they can do this and with a whole bunch of different things when it comes to immigration or the environment or just all kinds of stuff like that. The thing with executive orders, I mean, first of all, every president uses them and every president gets accused of being a tyrant when they do it. But you can go all the way back to George Washington. Everybody has issued executive orders. And presidents typically don't want to issue executive orders. They'd rather see things get passed in Congress because the only way to get rid of a law or to unmake a law is to pass another law. And we've talked about how hard that is. If you do something with an executive order, the next individual that comes in can just do another executive order and get rid of it. So it's not something that a lot of times is going to last very long. Almost all the executive orders that President Obama put in place, President Trump has made it his, part of his agenda to undo as many things that President Obama did as he possibly could, and so he's set out to do that. So it shows the weakness of executive orders. They sign treaties with other nations. And again, those have to be approved by Congress. So you see the check and balance thing there. They have something called executive privilege, which means that they get to determine what information and things of that nature that occurs within the executive branch, communications and stuff like that. They can censor that stuff and hold that stuff from other branches of the government, hold it from the public within reason. In the name of what's called national security. So there's just information and things like that's seen as sensitive that if it got out there could put the country at risk. So the president has the power to withhold some of that stuff. They can call special sessions of Congress, like the State of the Union address, where they can get up there and they can speak to all of Congress, and that's a huge, tremendous power that the president has to create what's called a bully pulpit. So that, to have all the cameras in the country and everybody listening and watching and paying attention. That is one of the biggest powers that the president has because of just the ability to influence. They can appoint cabinet members, okay, the heads of all these different agencies. They can fire them. They have to have Congress's approval to hire, and they also have the ability to fire those people, and they don't need approval from Congress to do that. And then I already mentioned the bully pulpit there. Again, don't have time to get into this, but President Trump has used that in ways that no president ever has. He, rather than going and talking to the media and talking to the cameras and stuff like that, the president has bypassed the media in a lot of ways with social media. And he can go out at any time and he's got millions and millions of people following him. You know, Obama and many other public figures have had social media accounts, but they've mostly been just kind of used to put out official announcements and things like that. President Trump directly tweets out to the American people and gets his thoughts directly out there and goes kind of does an end around on the media. And some people, I mean, see that as brilliant and genius. Some people don't like it very much, but it has become part of his presidency for sure. Okay, so try to finish this up. And actually, we just did. Okay, so this one went a little bit longer. Apologize for that. We'll like with Congress, the next one will be pretty quick. So appreciate you guys taking the time. Let me know if you have any questions. We'll talk to you soon. Okay, take care.